All right, I'm going to say something that might kind of shock you, because when you were in school, like I was in 1945, 46, the good nuns, Dominican nuns, by the way, taught that. They were the first time they ever came into my hometown of Rome, Georgia. And I was in the first class of the first Catholic school in Rome, Georgia. my name is Thomas Fahy. We say Fahy, F-A-H-Y, the way we pronounce it in the United States. My grandfather was from Galway. My father was the 13th child, and I was his only son. Anyway, I was in the first grade of the first Catholic school in Rome, Georgia, and they arranged for Dominican nuns to come down at that time, put their roses around their their habits, walk around and teach us the true faith. And I got the true faith from my parents and from my teachers, which children today are not getting. Children today are not getting the true faith. So we were very fortunate. I see a lot of people in my age bracket here. I might look a little bit younger than some of you, but I'm 77. And I don't know why I look younger, but my back's been hurting. Okay. But anyway, we learned the true faith. And all of this is just, if you have a good foundation in your faith, and you know you're not getting off your faith, when you read this, you just cannot believe what you're reading in these writings. 36 volumes. The first 10 volumes are like, it's kind of like this, the way I see it. First 10 volumes are like a repetition in the perfect way of what we were taught when we were young. But he goes into all the things we learned when we were young, but he clarifies things, makes them clear and perfect. And then he starts throwing in little hints about living in the divine will. And then when we get to volume 11, and I used to watch that movie called Star Trek. I always liked that movie, because I was amazed at some of the things they thought of. Anyway, it's like you're kind of going on like this, in the first 10 volumes, like this. Then you get to volume 11, warp 8, warp 9, warp 10, So it's just incredible what you learn after volume 11. But you need the first 10 to really get a firm foundation, because then you might just be looking for all the good stuff you're going to find in the higher volumes, and you never really practice the essentials. All right. During the three and a quarter years, wait a minute. The church has never known the original state of Adam. Now, I was surprised when I learned that, but then I'll tell you how I learned it. I was reading a book of Catholic theology, or maybe about based on the various councils of the church. And I read this one section of that book, and it said that the fathers of the Council of Trent, which is after the Protestant Reformation, they wanted to renew the teachings of the church to the point, make it clear to everybody, so they had something that they could count on that would keep them from wanting to go off to other churches or whatever. So they went on for quite a while, but they had a debate at one point during that council, and they were trying to decide what was actually the original state of Adam. And they went back and forth. Finally, one cardinal stood up and said, "Look, men, look, gentlemen, look, fellows, bishops, whatever." He says, "Let's just admit it. We don't know. We don't know what the original state of Adam was. However, we got to tell the people something, so we can safely say that they had sanctifying grace. We can safely say that they had the promise of immortality if they were faithful to God and passed their tests. And we can say that he probably had either infused knowledge, and they most likely had the gift of being of not having to suffer sicknesses and bad health and all that kind of stuff. But that's all we can really say, because we really don't know exactly what the original state of man was. And God himself did not want St. Thomas Aquinas to know. And God himself did not want St. John of the Cross to know. Because it was not the time, and if it wasn't the time, and if they knew what the original state of Adam was, they might want to return to that original state, and they couldn't. They couldn't. And in other words, Jesus says, I don't make things known that are not available to you, because my Father has not decreed that it would be. Therefore, if you can't have what you think you like to have, because it's not possible, then why tell you about it? So he didn't tell any saint, no saint, doctor, the church, no pope, nobody ever knew precisely what the original state of Adam was. But a little woman confined to bed for 64 years was informed deeply, incredibly, clearly on what the first state of Adam, original state of man was. Her name is Louisa Picaretta from Corrado, Italy. There's people here today that were over there for a big celebration just a few days ago, a week ago or so, or a few days ago actually. So we found out now what it was. We learned that when God created Adam, he created him with the gift of the divine will to possess, and that is, human will was integrated and fused with the divine will to such a degree that God acted in his human will as he acts in his own self, and that God communicated to Adam his holiness as God, and God communicated to Adam his beauty as God. So Adam contained the holiness, the beauty, and that action of God himself in his soul, and in his will, which is the main power of our soul. So, when the test came, and God had told him, you can have the whole Garden of Eden, just don't touch that one tree and don't eat its fruit. Well, we know the story. And he took it, after he brought it to him, and at that moment, he pulled his human will outside of the divine will, completely separated that perfect unity, not just union, but unity with the divine will. Pulled it out and ruined the human race, and we've been sick and dying and suffering and damnation forever since. Never was. He, at that moment, he closed the gates of heaven, and he opened the gates of hell from human beings that were made for the angels. So Adam's sin was horrific. But he had lived in the divine will for a while prior to his great, great mistake. And by living in the divine will, being our first father, we have a right to that inheritance. That's what we were supposed to get if he had been passed the test. All the human race. If Adam had passed the test, would have lived that perfect life of the divine will on earth as it is in heaven. But Adam ruined it by doing his own will, by being disobedient to God. So that's the state that we've been in ever since. And we know exactly how many years it's been. Solomon writes will be sins also in the Bible. So now, so the original sin was Adam taking his human will out of the divine will. Then he lost the strength of the divine will, the beauty of the divine will, the holiness of the divine will, and he became weak, vacillating, and prone to evil. I mean, that was the result of original sin. But in his particular case, and as far as I was the only one I know of, in his particular case, when he realized what had happened to him, what he had done to God, and what he had done to the human race, He had so much sorrow and compunction that he wept and he wept and he wept for 930 years. He wept his entire life. And I'm sure if he ran out of water tears, his soul was crying. And Jesus said, because of his deep sorrow, his deep compunction for what he had done, I gave him a special grace, and he never committed another sin. But that one sin ruined everything. But God, when God decrees something, wants something, like for the human beings to live on earth in the divine will as they do in heaven, it's going to happen. Because if he didn't for one reason, just one reason, if he didn't, Satan could laugh at God. Say, I took away what you wanted most. Then my second talk, well, we get some of it, I won't be able to do the whole thing, but it's too long. But my second talk is will be emphasize how much God wanted human beings. He really, really, really wanted human beings. And how much he did, how much he had in mind to enjoy them, and for them to enjoy life with him, and all the marvelous things that he had in mind for us, if Adam had not sinned. But God is going to have his time. He's already started. You're a perfect witness of that. You hear about this, and you've already been hearing about it. A lot of you have been starting to live this life. And so you're proof that God has decided, even before Adam sinned, that even if Adam did sin, of course he couldn't help but know it ahead of time, but that this kingdom would reign on earth for a period of time before the end of the world. And we're now here as the very beginners. We're in a very, very bad time, what St. Paul said, which is very, very, very true. He said, where wickedness abounds, we got it everywhere. Where wickedness abounds, grace does more about it. So we're the ones who, luckily, thank be our Blessed Mother for all her intercession for us, that we are receiving and that we are open, disposed for this great gift. Let's see a little bit more here. During the 3 1/4 years of his public life, Jesus did what was necessary for the salvation of souls so we could get to heaven. But during his 30 years prior to his public life, what was he doing? We don't know a whole lot about it, but we know a few things from Prophet Revelation and a little bit from the Gospel. But he tells us in the book of heaven that during those 30 years of his private life, that he was doing everything that was necessary before the Father to be able to regain and recover the gift of the divine will that Adam got rid of, that Adam rejected, and be able to recover it for us. Because he said, when I came down from heaven at the time of redemption, my primary purpose was to restore the reign of the Father's kingdom in souls. But the Father decreed that we'd have to wait another 2,000 years. And now the time has come. This is the time. By accomplishing the missions of both his hidden life and his public life, Jesus he himself accomplished the fullness of redemption. But the fullness of redemption, that is the return of man to his original state, would have to wait until the prophetic aspect of the Lord's Prayer would be fulfilled, which is taking place now. So even though Jesus did everything to bring us a total return to Adam's original state, we had to wait for that best part of it until now. Okay, let's see. All right, Louisa, I'm skipping around here because I don't want to spend too much time on this introductory stuff. Louisa would be the first human who had come into the world with original sin and returned to the original state of Adam and Eve. So Mary was the first human to live in the divine will after Adam's sin, but she did not come into the world with original sin. Jesus said that, I want you, Louisa, to be someone that they can identify with, because you came into the world with original sin. My mother didn't. And they would automatically say, well, if she was immaculate, then there's no hope for us. But she wasn't conceived immaculate, Louisa. So Jesus is using her as a prototype for us so that we can identify with someone who came in the world like we do with original sin. And yet she was able to return to the original state of man. Can anybody still hear me? Because sometimes my voice goes real low. The guy that just walked in, he got a powerful voice, but I don't have that powerful voice. Mark Mooney over here, he just came in. And he's been chauffeuring me around all the place the last few days. Took me to Galway and then up to Knock and back to Galway and then to another place, which I can't remember the name.
Moneygall.
No, there you go, Moneygall. And I got to sit next to him on the left side with my good ear. And when his phone rings every 5 or 10 minutes, somebody calling, he does healing. He has a healing gift. And anyway, I got to hear that loud, penetrating voice. But my voice is not that way. Mine's kind of soft. But thank God, we have this instrument here to use. So Louisa would be the first human being who came into the world with original sin, and yet returned to the original state of Adam and Eve, and she would be the exemplar for others to follow, who, like her, are also conceived in original sin. Before Jesus taught the Lord's Prayer, the Virgin Mary was conceived immaculate without original sin, and she, like Adam, was given the Father's kingdom at the moment of her creation. We talked about that earlier already. All right. I like to, I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit. I want to talk about one or two of the petitions of the Our Father that be helpful while we're getting ready for the next talk to prepare us. I talk about mostly to the new people that are here, people who haven't really heard a lot about this. All right, the seven petitions are: the first petition is, "Hallowed be thy name." The second one is, "Thy kingdom come," which is a prophecy. The third one is, Thy will be done. Now here's what Jesus says. He talks about it in the book of heaven as two aspects in one sentence. He says this, the first part is this: Thy will be done. Jesus explained to Louisa that with the words, Thy will be done, he wanted all Christians in every age to pray that God give them the grace to at least do the will of God. Otherwise, they shouldn't even be called Christians. So if you're not willing to do God's will, on a regular basis, then you're not really a Christian. If they do not dispose themselves to do the will of the Father in heaven, so if they're not disposing themselves to do the will of God, I got it wrong here. To at least do the will of God, then they shouldn't be called Christians. Now, then he went on to say, on earth, and that was the first part, and then as in heaven is the second part. Immediately after the words, Thy will be done, Jesus added the words, on earth as it is in heaven. With these words, one prays that the Father's kingdom may come on earth so that creatures can live in it. Live in the divine will, like God lives in the divine will. Souls in heaven not only do the will of God, but they live in it. Let me see where I lost my place here. Souls in heaven not only do the will of God, but live in it and possess it as their own kingdom. When I say own, I mean it's shared with all others. But in other words, God wants that His kingdom to be also ours. Like kids in a family home. It's the father and mother's home, but when they have children, it's also the children's home. Okay. Only doing the will of God means to submit. Only doing the will of God means to submit to the divine commands that God gives us, but does not mean to take possession of the divine will and live in it, which is to reacquire the happiest state of all. It means returning to the order, the place, and the purpose for which human beings were created by God in the beginning. So, I'll just go ahead and say something that I'm sure maybe none of you will object to. Every now and then we have someone who's been brainwashed by the news media and the TV to think that things are different than what God said. But the third millennium of Christianity is also the seventh millennium of human history. The third millennium of Christianity, which is now beginning, more or less, is the same as the seventh millennium of human history. Jesus told Louisa exactly that. He told her that between the creation of Adam and my incarnation in Mary's womb was 4,000 years. And I told people last night, in a little meeting we had last night, I said, there was an Irish bishop. The only problem was he wasn't Catholic, but anyway, he was a Protestant, what do you call him, Episcopalian, or whatever y'all call him, bishop. Thank you. What did you say?
Not to forget the angels at 12.
Oh, we're going to pick up the angels. Anyway, this bishop, and I used to know his name, short for the name. He spent 15 years studying the Old Testament to determine how long it was between Adam and Jesus. And he figured it out exactly, just like Jesus told Louisa. He got it right. He said it was 4,000 years. And then Jesus told Louisa the same thing. He said, it was 4,000 years from Adam to my coming, and it's now another 2,000 years. We're coming to the end of the sixth millennium. And of course, he was talking to her back in the early 1900s. And then he went on to say, maybe not in the same place, but that during this new era that's coming, the era of the reign of the divine will. Now, if you've heard it's going to be the reign of this, or the reign of that, or the reign of this, all of it has to be above all of that. It's the reign of the divine will. Divine will is the source of everything. It's the cause of everything except moral evil. And everything else is an effect of it. Even His great divine mercy, which we're all grateful for, that's an effect of the divine will. It's not the source of the divine will, it's an effect. Divine will is the cause and source of all that exists, except moral evil. And so, this new era of the divine will is a time when Jesus says, God will be able to finally rest in souls, because they won't have to be working and working to get them back to the original state anymore. He will have them. And then he says the souls will rest in God. So that goes along with creation week. God worked for 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh. Creation week is an example for many, many things in human history that God gave us. Whenever they try to have a work week that's different than 7 days, the 7-day calendar, it always goes, it don't work. I think the French tried it back in when they started going away from God. They come up with a 10-day week. Tried it, but then it didn't work. Nothing works, 7-day week works, because God set it up. But we have to give him the honor that he deserves on Sundays, not any other time. All right, we have somebody raised their hand and pointed out that 12 o'clock, they want to set the entrance, so let's do that. You want to stand up? Okay. Did you want to read it? Hang on. Okay. The angel of the Lord declared unto Mary, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Behold, the handmaid of the Lord. Be unto thee according to thy word. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Pray for us, Holy Mother of God, and for us we beseech you, O Lord, thy grace to our hearts, that we, through the incarnation of Christ thy Son, was made known by the message of an angel, may by his passion and cross be brought to the glory of his resurrection, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. May always with us, and may souls of faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. David kind of the big boss back there and tells us when to do what. So what's the next major thing that's going to be a change?
I think we have 5 or 10 minutes questions. Any questions on how to begin living in the divine will?
Okay. And the next talk I give is going to, one of my favorite talks. I'm not going to tell you the name of it right now. Because I have to take time to explain the name of it. Otherwise, you might call the sheriff. There were some questions that were written on a piece of paper, but did anybody else have a question? The process is to bring the question up or send it up on paper, and then I'll read it out loud and try to answer it.
Just a question, please. How much of Louise's writings would we have to absorb in order to really kind of take on board the essence of this practice?
Yeah, I would say, Jesus, gave to Louise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and so on.
36 volumes is a lot of writing.
Yeah, because over a period of 40 years, and she had to learn to live it herself. We can't skip over those lower volumes altogether. I mean, we can. I know in my own life, I was so excited about this stuff that I just had to know what was going on with some of the higher volumes. So I did read the lower ones, but I went ahead and I translated a few of the volumes. I think the first one I translated was volume 19, because that was the last one we had for many years. And But Father, there's a priest in Italy. He's from Spain, Father Martin, Father Pablo Martin. He recommends volume 2 and volume 11. The reason he does that is that volume 2 is preparing you, giving you a good foundation for what's coming later. But volume 11 is where he starts pouring on all this incredible insights into the divine will. I'm not saying he doesn't do any of it all in the first 10. He does it every now and then. But volume 11, he just goes, divine will, divine will, divine will, divine will, divine will. So, but if God gave them to us in that order, you know, we have our choice. You either go one by one by one by one, or maybe peek ahead and look at some of the higher volumes as well as reading the lower volumes. And, but the lower volumes are necessary because we can sometimes get so excited about just learning out of curiosity what's in the upper volumes that we forget about living the stable foundational life of the divine book. Okay. Now, I think that guy, the fellow in the back, I think you heard his question. But a lot of times, like Eamon said, especially if you talk fast, I have no idea what you said. Even though it's English to you, it's something else to me. I've only got one good ear. So, what is it?
Questions on the paper, maybe?
Yeah, anybody have a question that you want?
I gave them earlier. You have
Okay.